legislative candidates from the 4th Legislative District. Representative Matt Shea, the Republican in the race, Democrat Amy Biviano, the Democrat, of course, in the race, and we're willing to take your questions. Calls that you may have on certain questions or certain topics that maybe you're more interested in than others. I want to talk with both of you about government involvement in certain industries that may compete in the private sector. And specifically, I've had a lot of people, I've been talking with a few people over the past week. I said I'm going to be having a show with Representative Shea and Amy Biviano. What would you ask them? And one of the folks that I talked to owns a business that competes with the government, an employment agency that competes with the government. So the government, Washington State government has WorkSource. She's competing with the government. First of all, I assume both of you are aware of that. But is that a proper role of government? Is that something you think government should be doing? And if so, maybe there's a standard that each of you uses to determine what businesses the government should be in the business of operating, and perhaps what they should not be in the business of operating. Amy, let's start with you.
You know what? I'm glad you bring that up, because that is an interesting question, and I don't think there is any one right answer, but I like the way you phrase that as a process question. So thank you. In general, it makes sense to have our Washington State, especially our WorkSource service, in place, because they do such a strong job and give such a good place for employees seeking work to have a centralized location. Now, that said, should they edge out private sector employers doing the same thing? Absolutely not. I think competition drives us well. And really having both the government and the private sector involved in that service makes both run better. It's another example of market-driven solutions, just like the Washington Policy Center does such a good job promoting. Now, as far as a standard for how to determine which is best done by the public good versus the private sector, I think really when you look at the infrastructure needs, the services that really make us more competitive, allow the private sector to work better. That should be done more by the public, but certainly we can look at whether the private sector can do it better, as long as we are making sure we keep to a strong standard. We don't allow, I think, the best part of Washington State is to not allow a race to the bottom, because if you're just looking for the cheapest possible service, you'll also end up with the cheapest quality job. Rather, we make sure that we have a strong standard of measurement, and then we see what needs to be done for the public good, the infrastructure that allows us all to work better within a private economy, and then we let the private sector do its work too.
Representative Shea, what do you say to someone who has a business that competes with the government?
Well, first I would say I think it's a false assumption to say that just necessarily the cheapest services would be the worst services. I think that that's the whole point of the free market, is being able to do things in such an efficient manner that you can do things cheaply and compete in the free market. The role of government is very simple. It's to protect their God-given unalienable rights to life, liberty, property, and the ability to defend the same. And when we talk about things for state government, we really have several priorities, but they really fall into four categories, in my opinion, and that's public safety, that's education, transportation, and then protecting our most vulnerable. So when you look at privatizing things like, let's say, the printing office, which we introduced bill after bill, I helped lead that fight, and we don't privatize the printing office, something clearly that could be done in the private sector. I think we're wasting money. We're wasting taxpayer money, and it's an example of a government efficiency that we could implement pretty quickly. And the fact that we haven't done so, I think, shows that the judgment really has been clouded on where the private sector can take over a lot of these things that government is currently doing because of one-party control in Olympia for the last decade.
326-9200, 1-800-920-9244. Let's go to the phones and talk to Tim. Tim, you're on KXLY.
Yeah, thanks for holding this. Representative Shea, I had a quick question for you. You were talking about free market medicine a few minutes ago, and I guess the first question I would ask specifically to you, and it's probably a political philosophical question, is where has the free market worked for us in the past? I mean, if we look back at the 1980s in deregulation, if you look at your cable bill right now or your electrical bill, I'm certain that you are not thinking that deregulation has been successful. So you must admit that there are times when regulation is necessary.
Tim, thanks for your phone call.
Well, I think in that particular instance, it was government involvement that created the problem. It was government involvement in our banking sector, particularly, that created the problem. It was government involvement in our monetary system with the Federal Reserve that has created the massive fiat currency crisis that we have today. It's everywhere you see government being involved, it does two things. First, it distorts the market, and then second, it forces us down the road to come back and play catch-up. That's not a free market. That's government involvement causing the problem. And government involvement, particularly in healthcare, is what has driven up costs, because you have only pennies on the dollar being reimbursed for things like Medicaid and Medicare. And those costs have to be borne by somebody, and it ends up being other taxpayers that have to bear that cost. That isn't a free market, that's government involvement. So that, I would say, where has government involvement ever worked? That would be my question to you.
Let's talk about charter schools and the measure that's going to be on the ballot this fall. This will be yet another measure that Washington voters have voted upon. This is a little bit different in what it would do, but it is supported by Democrats, Democrat Eric Pettigrew from Seattle, as well as Republicans. There are many financial groups in the state that are Democrats and Republicans that have donated to this effort. It would essentially allow for a small number of charter schools in the state. First of all, where do you stand on charter schools more broadly? And second of all, do you support this initiative that people are going to be voting on? And Amy, we'll start with you.
You know, charter schools have a place in the array of parental choice. I'm glad that we have a strong system here in Washington that allows us to have strong public education, which furthers homeschooling and raises the bar for those who choose private education. But that essence of choice is, to me, the essence of this debate. Because if you so choose that to say that your child would benefit from a private education and you have the means to make that happen, great. Everyone should have that choice. That said, when we already have a strained budget, as we're seeing with the McCleary decision, it doesn't make sense to pull the limited funds we already have into an alternative system, creating a new infrastructure when we already have the existing structure, and this money would be better spent improving our current public schools. When we have more the luxury of funding for additional school options, great, let's explore that. But right now, when we need to be funneling money and improvements into our public system, that's where we need to focus, rather than pulling our focus away from our investment in our future.
So you would oppose the measure that's going to be on the ballot?
Yes, I would.
Okay. Representative Shea?
Well, I think that the way that the charter school bill is written, very specifically right now, there's some legal problems that we would need to fix. Generally, I do support the idea of charter schools, but it goes to the heart of something else, and that's government involvement again. We have, if you talk to the local school districts and in the school boards and just ask them what are the problems, and most of the time, 9 times out of 10, they will say it's been unfunded mandates from the state and federal level. Now, Representative Larry Krause and I introduced a bill to get rid of and eliminate or reduce most of those unfunded mandates on local school districts, giving them the flexibility to spend money on teachers versus some other, weird program that they don't think is very important at the local level. That really is the approach I think that we need to take, and getting those regulations off the backs of our local school districts is really what charter schools kind of is in a very small way, and it maybe should be done throughout the whole state of Washington so that all the school districts actually have that reduced burden, and see what happens then. And again, I think if we do that, it'll increase competition and allow flexibility at the local level, which we just desperately need right now.
I want to continue to talk about education here in just a few moments, but we have a lot more phone calls to get to, so let us talk to Matt. Matt, you're on KXLY.
I'll try to be as fast as I can.
Okay.
Candidates, what do you think, number one, of R-74 in your opinions? And number two, what do you think about legalization or medical marijuana that's going to be on the ballot this fall?
All right, Representative Shea, let's start with you.
Well, let me start with R-74. I'm adamantly opposed to that. I've been leading the fight against the idea of same-sex marriage for several reasons, but one of the reasons is because R-74 is anti-business, and let me be very specific on how that is. In R-74, it very specifically would require bakers, it would require taxi drivers, it would require hotel owners, it would require limo drivers, it would require hotel owners, all of these people. It would require all of these people to participate in same-sex wedding ceremonies against their will, against their conscience. There's a recent ruling out of Western Washington that upheld the right of conscientious objection. The Washington State Constitution under Article 1, Section 11 very specifically says there's an absolute freedom of conscience. Article 26 says there must be perfect toleration of religious sentiment. So it's a very clear issue. This is anti-business. And if somebody doesn't believe me out there listening right now, you can go to the February 6th Judiciary Committee hearing, Minute 4, where I asked this question of nonpartisan staff, and they agreed with my interpretation. Regarding medical marijuana, the current bill that's out there right now, the current initiative, I think is very poorly drafted. I think has some significant problems. I'm opposed to that. However, I help lead the Republican caucus to help with the legalization of true medicinal marijuana using nebulized form that's prescribed by a doctor and issued by a pharmacy. And I think that really is the way to go forward. In addition to that, and part of that bill is also legalizing non-THC commercial hemp, which would be a huge boon and create a new industry in Washington State, because we have to import a lot of twine to tie up our hops and vineyards, and that actually is something that hemp can be used for and grown in Washington State and used for in Washington State. So,
all right, Amy?
You know, I'm really glad to take a question about marriage equality today. This happens to be my 15-year anniversary. My husband happens to be here with us, and got to tell you, I have never had 15 years that are more happy in my life. So, because marriage is the foundation of our community, and because marriage allows you to take personal responsibility for another person, you are saying, rather than have the rest of the community take care of this person, rather than saying, you know, they'll fend for themselves, marriage is about saying, we are bound together, we're bound to this community, we are going to put down roots and be here. And furthermore, the way this referendum is written, it is about religious liberty. Every church has the ability to say, this works with our doctrine, this works with our personal religious journey, or it does not. And because some churches will choose to participate and some will not, we now have the ability to say, my religion is being respected. And especially since we have, Mr. Shea has talked consistently on his website and here on our program today that he espouses less government, more freedom, and that he's overly concerned about government involvement. You know, I would hope that this idea of religious freedom would really work within this framework.
On the marijuana?
On the marijuana, again, I don't think government should be in charge of making our health care decisions. I think that as we're looking at medical marijuana along the spectrum of other health care decisions, let's make that choice be between the patient and their doctor.
All right, 326-9200, 1-800-920-9244. We got several more questions lined up, and we will get to them when we come back here on Newscope, 920 KXLY. Talking with the candidates for legislature out in the 4th District. This is basically the heart of the Spokane Valley in that general area, and the candidates you know quite well by now, Representative Matt Shea and Amy Biviano. To both of you, I want to talk quickly, because we only have a few minutes left here, about the workers' comp issue, and specifically the recent report that we got from L&I that they may be looking at an up to 28% rate hike next year. There was a previous report to that said a 19% rate hike sustained over 10 years. My question to both of you is this: to a small business owner who perhaps is listening to the program this afternoon, who has to deal with these issues all the time, specifically these L&I, these workers' comp rates, What is your plan to either hold them in place or bring them down? Representative Shea, let's start with you.
Well, we have to bring them down, very clearly. There's a lot of business owners that have been talking about that, and I helped with a bipartisan solution here about year and a half ago now to break the logjam and have the first comprehensive workers' compensation reform in 20 years in the state of Washington, because we went forward with something called structured settlements. I think very specifically that could be changed to actual final settlements, save more money, expand medical provider networks, which cuts the cost very, very significantly for L&I. And I think that if we just do those couple of things, I think that gets us pointed in the right direction, and we'll see quite a bit of savings.
Amy?
All right. Well, obviously the rates must be lower. Having worked with small businesses for the past 6 years, I know the burden that our small business owners are bearing. Now, let me say, I do understand that the L&I program has cash in reserves that they've been using to buy down the rates, if you will. And I believe that policy should absolutely continue this year, especially until we have our economic recovery. But let me also address the structured settlements idea, especially since, frankly, that's one of those issues where you blame the person who's injured. You're saying, look, we don't know the extent of your injuries. We don't know how much medical care you're going to need, but we know that you need cash now. So we're going to ask you to pay up front, and maybe we cover all of your bills. Maybe we don't. But at minimum, we're just going to give you a check. Now, I don't think that that's a right move for us as a state. We are better than that. And furthermore, since a worker is working for their employer and that employer is already paying into this system, it's there to compensate for injuries on the job.
The governor did support that, the structured settlement option.
I'm sorry, I meant taking it all the way further, as Mr. Shea was suggesting.
You're talking about the voluntary settlement option.
Yes.
Let me ask both of you about a hybrid type system. Small business owners I talk with all the time say they would like to have a choice. They would like to have the choice to either buy it through the state or buy it in the private sector. They've done this in West Virginia, where they recently opened it up. I think it was in 2006. They've had an almost 50% drop in claim protests. They've had a 60% drop in claim protests. They've had about a 45% drop in premium cost, and 90% of the claims now in West Virginia are done within 30 days, whereas it takes 280 days for a claim to be completed in Washington State. So my question to both of you is this: do you support a hybrid type system, or do you support privatizing it altogether to give a small business the opportunity to buy their coverage outside of the state? Representative Shea?
Well, I do support a hybrid system, but I want to say something very quickly. I don't see how a voluntary settlement could possibly be blaming the worker. By that time, and using medical provider networks, they've received all the treatment that they have. They've received a prognosis from their doctor. They've received future treatment options from their doctor, and it's their option to do so. And going forward, I think we have to keep that in mind with medical provider networks, that these are tried, proven techniques and how to get workers back on the job faster and also save money. And that's the direction we need to go.
Well, let me talk about the public option versus completely privatizing. I would support the ability to have the choice between the public versus a private system, but having worked with several clients who are both in Washington and Idaho, which does have a completely private L&I system, let me tell you, while some industries benefit, a lot did not. I saw some clients who had triple the rates when they went into Idaho, because when you have market competition, yes, you do see them competing against each other for those rates, but there's no guarantee they end up lower. And my small businesses were seeing the rates in Idaho being triple what they were paying in Washington. So it was only because we were able to work out reciprocity agreements and have the state honor their payments here in Washington that we got them the ability to survive. And I think the idea of completely privatizing the L&I system is dangerous.
All right, let's go back to the phones. We have a couple of minutes for a few last questions. Let's talk to Josh. Josh, here on KXLY.
The question I had was for Amy Biviano. I think pretty much nobody would disagree that over the last decade our state is kind of headed in the wrong direction. How would it make sense for the people of the 4th District to give Frank Chopp and the House Democrats another vote?
Amy?
Thank you, Josh. That's not a bad question at all. Josh, let me ask you this, or let me let you know this. I met with Frank Chopp when I first declared my candidacy, and I let him know that while I'm a Democrat, I think it's time we look past our party labels and we just work together to get things done for our community. You'll notice that's why I'm a Democrat with strong Republican and independent support. And because of that, I know how to work across the aisle. I know how to push past our party labels and just work for the betterment of our community. Now, yes, currently the Democrats have control. I will let you know this also. Since the 4th Legislative District has only been represented by one party for the past 20 years, doesn't it make sense that party diversity helps our community? We also have a situation where our current representative uniformly votes no rather than reaching across the aisle. And we've already seen where that has been to the detriment of our community.
Amy, thank you, Matt. You got about 10 seconds.
Yeah, real quick. Well, that wasn't the case with workers' compensation reform, which is bipartisan, and also a dock bill to help expand dock manufacturing here in Spokane Valley, which is also bipartisan, that I got through unanimously to the House of Representatives.
Representative Matt Shea, the Republican, Amy Biviano, the Democrat, thank you both for joining us this afternoon. Really do appreciate it. You're listening to News Scope on 920 KX.